The morning was cold and gray when Rosa Mendoza stepped off the bus in downtown Boston. She was 63 years old, and her knees ached from the long ride. She had taken 2 buses and walked 6 blocks to get here. Her shoes were old but polished. Her coat was thin but clean. She had ironed her dress the night before, a simple blue one with small white flowers that her daughter had bought her years ago for a birthday she could barely remember now got in her hands. She carried a brown leather folder. The edges were worn soft from years of touching. Inside were 40 pages of paper covered in handwritten notes. Musical notes. Notes she had carried in her head for over 4 decades before she finally found the courage to write them down. Rosa stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building in front of her. The Hartwell Conservatory of Music. It was one of the most famous music schools in the country. The building was old and beautiful, made of red brick with tall windows and heavy wooden doors. Students walked in and out, young people with instrument cases on their backs and confidence in their steps. They looked like they belonged here. Rosa did not. She almost turned around. She almost got back on the bus and went home to her small apartment where no one would laugh at her and no one would look at her the way she knew they were about to look at her. But then she thought about her grandmother. She thought about her father. She thought about the old piano in the house she grew up in, the one she had to leave behind when everything fell apart. And she walked through those heavy doors. The lobby was grand. There were marble floors and high ceilings and portraits of famous composers on the walls. A crystal chandelier hung above, catching the light. Rosa felt very small. A young woman sat behind a large reception desk, typing on a computer. She had perfect hair and perfect nails, and a perfect smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Rosa walked up to the desk. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. "Excuse me," she said. Her accent was still there, even after all these years. She had never been able to lose it completely. "I would like to ask about the composition showcase. The one happening next month." The receptionist looked up. Her eyes moved over Rosa quickly, taking in the old coat, the worn shoes, the gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. The smile stayed on her face, but something behind it shifted. "The annual showcase?" she asked. "That's for enrolled students and invited composers. Are you here to pick up tickets for a family member?" "No," Rosa said. She held the leather folder a little tighter. "I would like to audition. I have a composition I would like to submit." There was a pause. The receptionist blinked. "I'm sorry. Did you say you want to audition?" "Yes." Another pause. The young woman glanced to her left, where a man in a gray suit sat at another desk. He had heard everything. He was already smiling, but not in a kind way. "Ma'am," the receptionist said slowly, like she was talking to a child, "the showcase is for professional composers, people who have studied music at a university level. It's not really for hobbyists." The word hung in the air. Hobbyist. Rosa had heard that word before. She had heard worse words, too. She had been cleaning houses for 30 years in this country. She knew what people thought when they looked at her. She knew what they assumed. But she also knew something they did not. "I understand," Rosa said calmly, "but I would still like to audition. I have my composition here. If someone could just look at it." The man in the gray suit stood up and walked over. He was younger than Rosa, maybe 45, with the look of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. "Ma'am, I appreciate you coming in," he said. His voice was smooth and practiced. "But we receive hundreds of submissions from trained composers every year. Graduates from Juilliard, Berkeley, schools all over the world. We simply cannot accommodate everyone who walks in off the street." Off the street. Rosa let the words wash over her. She did not react. "I am not asking for special treatment," she said quietly. "I am asking for 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes for someone to look at my work." The man and the receptionist exchanged a look. It was a look Rosa recognized. They were trying to figure out how to make her leave without causing a scene. They were wondering if she was confused or lonely or maybe a little bit crazy. They were not wondering if she might actually have something worth hearing. That possibility had not crossed their minds at all. "I'm sorry," the man said. "There's really nothing we can do." Rosa nodded slowly, but she did not move. She stood there at that desk, holding her folder, and she did not move. The seconds stretched out. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The man cleared his throat. "Is there someone else I could speak to?" Rosa asked. "A director, perhaps? Or one of the professors?" "They're all very busy," the man said. And honestly, even if they weren't, the answer would be the same. "This program is for professionals." "I was a professional," Rosa said. The words came out before she could stop them. "A long time ago. In Chile. Before I came here." The man's expression flickered. For just a moment, something like curiosity passed through his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that same polished wall. "I'm sure you were," he said. "But that doesn't change our policies." Rosa looked at him. She looked at the receptionist. She looked around the beautiful lobby with its marble floors and its chandelier and its portraits of dead men who had been given every opportunity in the world to share their music. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake in her small apartment, hearing symphonies in her head that no one would ever hear. She thought about the 41 years she had spent in silence, and she decided she was not leaving. "I will wait," she said. "Excuse me?" "I will wait, here, until someone can give me 15 minutes. The man's face hardened. "Ma'am, you can't just wait here all day." "Why not?" Rosa asked. "I am not bothering anyone. I will sit over there." She pointed to a bench near the window. "I will be quiet, and I will wait." Before he could respond, she walked to the bench and sat down. She placed her folder on her lap. She folded her hands on top of it, and she waited. The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head and walked away, muttering something under his breath. The receptionist turned back to her computer, pretending Rosa did not exist. An hour passed. Then, too, students came and went. Professors walked through the lobby, barely glancing at the old woman on the bench. A security guard approached once, but Rosa just smiled at him and explained she was waiting for an appointment. He did not ask her to leave. By the third hour, Rosa's back was aching and her stomach was empty. She had not brought any food or water. She had not thought she would be here this long. But she did not move. She had waited 41 years. She could wait a little longer. What she did not know was that someone was watching her. Someone who would change everything. The person watching Rosa was a young man named Daniel Reyes. He was 29 years old, a junior faculty member at the conservatory, and he had been walking through the lobby when he first noticed her. Something about the way she sat caught his attention. She was so still, so patient. Most people who got turned away from the front desk left immediately, embarrassed or angry. But this woman just sat there on that bench, like she had all the time in the world. Daniel had grown up in a neighborhood where people like Rosa were everywhere. His own grandmother had looked like her. Same gray hair, same quiet dignity, same hands worn rough from years of hard work. He knew what it felt like to be looked through instead of looked at. He watched her for a while from across the lobby, pretending to check his phone. 3 hours she sat there. 3 hours without complaining, without making a scene, without giving up. Finally, he could not ignore her anymore. He walked over and sat down on the bench beside her. "You've been here a long time," he said. Rosa looked at him. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Yes," she said simply. "They told you no?" "They told me this place is for professionals." She smiled a little. "They think I am just a confused old woman." Daniel looked at the leather folder on her lap. "What's in there?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the folder and pulled out the first page. It was covered in handwritten musical notation. The notes were small and precise, written in pencil that had faded slightly with age. Daniel leaned closer. Even at a glance, he could see this was not the work of an amateur. The composition was complex, layered. There were markings and annotations in Spanish scattered throughout. "Did you write this?" he asked. "Yes." "When?" Rosa looked down at the paper in her hands. "I finished writing it last year, but I have been composing it in my head for over 40 years. Daniel stared at her. 40 years? Rosa nodded. And then, slowly, she began to tell him her story. She was born in Santiago, Chile, in a small house with a leaky roof and walls that shook when the wind blew too hard. Her family was poor. Her father worked in a factory that made textiles. Her mother took in laundry from the wealthier families in the city. They had very little, but they had music. Rosa's grandmother had been a singer. Not famous, not professional, but gifted. She used to sing old folk songs while she cooked, while she cleaned, while she rocked Rosa to sleep at night. Those melodies became part of Rosa's blood. By the time she was 5 years old, she was humming harmonies that made her grandmother stop and stare. When Rosa was 7, her father did something extraordinary. He had been saving money for years, coin by coin, hidden in a tin box under the floorboards. One evening, he came home with a piano. It was old and battered, with chipped keys and a crack running down the side. He had bought it from a church that was closing down. It took 4 men to carry it into their tiny living room, and it took up almost all the space they had. But when Rosa sat down and touched the keys for the first time, she felt something unlock inside her chest. She taught herself to play. There was no money for lessons, so she learned by listening. She would stand outside the windows of the music school across town and memorize what she heard. She would borrow books from the library and study them until the pages fell apart. By the time she was 11, she was composing her own pieces. Simple ones at first, then more complicated. Her teachers at school did not know what to make of her. One of them, an older woman who had studied music in her youth, recognized what Rosa had. She called it a gift from God. At 17, Rosa was offered a scholarship to the Universidad de Chile. It was one of the best music programs in the country. Her parents wept when they heard the news. No one in their family had ever been to university. No one had ever been given a chance like this. For 2 years, Rosa studied. She learned theory and history and technique. She played with students who had been trained since birth, and she kept up with every one of them. Her professors said she had something rare, something that could not be taught. One of them told her she would be remembered, that her music would outlive them all. And then in September of 1973, everything ended. Rosa did not go into detail about what happened. She did not need to. Daniel knew enough history to understand. The military coup, the violence that followed, the people who disappeared in the night and never came back. Rosa's father had been involved with a workers' union. That was enough to put the whole family in danger. They fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Rosa remembered standing in the doorway of their little house, looking at the piano one last time. Her mother was pulling her arm, telling her they had to go. There was no time. But Rosa could not move. That piano was everything. It was her father's sacrifice. It was her future. It was the only thing that had ever made her feel like she mattered. She never saw it again. The family made their way north, through borders and checkpoints and refugee camps. Eventually, they reached the United States. Rosa was 19 years old when she arrived in Boston with nothing. No money. No papers. No piano. No future. She found work cleaning houses. It was the only job available to someone like her. She scrubbed floors and washed windows and folded other people's laundry. She got married to a man from her neighborhood, a kind man who worked construction. They had 2 daughters. Life was hard but stable, and then her husband got sick. Cancer. He fought it for 3 years before it took him. Rosa was left alone with 2 young girls and a stack of medical bills that seemed impossible to pay. She worked double shifts. She took any job she could find. There was no time for music. There was no room for dreams, but the music never left her. Every night, after her daughters were asleep, Rosa would lie in the darkness and hear melodies in her head. Symphonies that built and swelled and broke apart and came together again. She would hum quietly to herself, afraid to wake anyone, afraid to let the sound out into the world where it might disappear. The compositions grew more complex as the years passed. They became a secret world she carried inside her, a place no one could take away. She never wrote any of it down. Writing it down felt like a promise she could not keep. What was the point of putting notes on paper if no one would ever play them? She was a cleaning lady now. That was who she was. The girl who had once been called a prodigy, the young woman who had been told she would be remembered, that person was gone. She had died somewhere on the road out of Santiago, left behind with the piano and the house and the life that could have been. 40 years passed like this. 40 years of silence. And then one evening, Rosa's youngest grandchild asked her a question. "Abuela," the little girl said, "why do you always hum the same song?" Rosa looked at her. She had not realized she was humming. She did not even know she still did it. "What song?" she asked. "The pretty one," her granddaughter said. "The one that sounds like crying and laughing at the same time." Rosa felt something crack open inside her chest. That night, after everyone went home, she sat down at her kitchen table with a pencil and a stack of paper. And she began to write. Took her almost a year to get it all down. 40 years of music, trapped inside her head, finally flowing out through her fingers. When she finished, she had 40 pages. She called the piece Lala's Q Espera, the light that waits. And now here she was, sitting on a bench in a place that did not want her, holding those 40 pages in her worn hands. Daniel was quiet for a long time after she finished speaking. The lobby had grown darker. The afternoon light was fading through the tall windows. Finally, he stood up. "Come with me," he said. Rosa looked up at him. "Where?" "There's a practice room down the hall. I want to hear what you've written." Rosa's hands trembled as she gathered her pages. She had waited 41 years for someone to say those words. She followed him down the corridor, her heart pounding with every step. The practice room was small and plain. There was a piano against one wall, a few chairs stacked in the corner, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard where dead leaves were blowing in circles. The room smelled like old wood and dust. It was nothing special, but to Rosa it felt like a cathedral. She had not been in a room with a piano for over 40 years. Daniel pulled out the piano bench and sat down. He looked up at Rosa, who was still standing near the door, clutching her folder like it might fly away if she let go. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the pages. Rosa nodded. She walked over slowly and handed him the folder. Her hands were shaking. She could not make them stop. Daniel opened the folder and looked at the first page. For a moment, he did not say anything. He just studied the notes, his eyes moving across the paper. Rosa watched his face, trying to read his expression. She had shown these pages to no one, not her daughters, not her grandchildren, no one. She had been too afraid. Afraid they would not understand. Afraid they would think she was foolish. Afraid that the music in her head was not as beautiful as she believed it to be. Daniel turned to the second page, then the third. His eyebrows drew together. He went back to the first page and looked at it again. "You wrote all of this by hand," he said quietly. "Yes." "There are no corrections, no crossed-out notes." Rosa shook her head. "I did not need to correct anything. I have heard this piece in my head every day for 40 years. I know every note, every pause, every breath." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the piano. He placed the first page on the music stand and positioned his hands over the keys. "This is just the piano reduction," he said. "The full orchestration would need a whole ensemble to hear it properly. But let me try the opening." Rosa nodded. She moved to one of the chairs and sat down. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. After all these years, someone was about to play her music. Someone was about to hear what had lived inside her for so long. Daniel began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle. They floated up into the air like smoke from a candle. It was a simple melody, almost like a lullaby. But there was something underneath it, something darker, a shadow hiding beneath the sweetness. Rosa closed her eyes. She knew this part. She had heard it 1,000 times in the silence of her bedroom, in the noise of the buses she rode to work, in the quiet moments between one task and the next. But hearing it played out loud, on a real piano, by real hands, was something else entirely. It was like meeting an old friend she had only ever seen in dreams. Daniel played through the first passage. The melody grew more complex. Layers began to build on top of each other. The left hand introduced a counter-melody that wove around the main theme like a vine around a tree. The rhythm shifted, became more urgent. The shadow underneath was rising now, pushing against the sweetness, threatening to break through. And when it did, the music changed. The gentle lullaby transformed into something fierce and desperate. The notes crashed against each other, like waves against rocks. There was pain in this section, real pain, the kind that comes from losing everything you ever loved. Rosa felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She had written this part in the weeks after her husband died. She had poured all her grief into these notes, all her anger, all her fear. And now she was hearing it for the first time outside her own head. Daniel's hands slowed. He reached a passage that was technically difficult, and he stumbled slightly. He stopped, went back, and tried again. This time he made it through. The music began to shift once more. The storm was passing. The darkness was lifting. A new theme emerged, fragile and tentative, like the first flower pushing through snow after a long winter. Hope. That was what this section was about. Rosa had written it the year her first grandchild was born. She remembered holding that tiny baby in her arms and feeling something she thought she had lost forever. The belief that beautiful things could still happen, that life could still surprise you. Daniel played on. The piece built toward its climax. All the themes came together now, weaving in and out of each other. The lullaby and the storm and the hope all combining into something bigger than any of them alone. It was the sound of a life, a whole life, with all its joy and sorrow and struggle and love, compressed into music. And then, finally, the ending. A single note, held long and soft, fading slowly into silence. Daniel lifted his hands from the keys. He did not move. He did not turn around. He just sat there, staring at the piano, his shoulders rising and falling with his breath. Rosa waited. The silence stretched between them. She could hear the wind outside, rattling the dead leaves in the courtyard. She could hear her own heartbeat, still too fast, still too loud. Finally, Daniel turned around. His eyes were red. "Where did you study?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. "The Universidad de Chile," Rosa said. "A long time ago." Before the coup. Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't know how to. He stopped, took a breath, and started again. I have been teaching here for 3 years. I have seen hundreds of compositions. Pieces by students who have trained their whole lives. Pieces by professionals with decades of experience. And I have never seen anything like this. Rosa did not know what to say. She had hoped her music was good. She had believed it was good. But hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel real in a way it never had before. The way you use countermelody, Daniel continued. The emotional structure. The way the themes evolve and return. This is graduate level work. No, this is beyond graduate level. This is... He trailed off, searching for the right word. This is the work of a master. Rosa's hands were trembling again. She pressed them together in her lap to keep them still. I am just a cleaning lady, she said quietly. Daniel stood up from the piano bench. He walked over to where she sat and knelt down so that he was looking up at her. No, he said firmly. You are a composer. You have always been a composer. The cleaning was just what you did to survive. But this, he held up the pages, this is who you are. Rosa felt something break loose inside her chest. All those years of hiding, all those years of telling herself that the music did not matter, that she did not matter, that the girl who once dreamed of concert halls and orchestras was gone forever. And now this young man was kneeling in front of her, holding her life's work in his hands, telling her that it meant something. She began to cry. Not quiet tears this time, but deep, heavy sobs that shook her whole body. 41 years of silence, pouring out of her all at once. Daniel did not try to stop her. He did not tell her it was okay. He just waited, letting her feel what she needed to feel. When the sobs finally slowed, Rosa wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Daniel through blurry eyes. What happens now? She asked. Daniel stood up. There was a look on his face that Rosa did not recognize at first. It took her a moment to understand what it was. Determination. Now, he said, I go talk to some people. This piece deserves to be heard, not just by me in a practice room, by everyone, and I am going to make sure that happens. He handed the folder back to Rosa. Can you come back tomorrow? Same time? Rosa nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Good. Daniel walked to the door, then paused and looked back at her. 41 years is a long time to wait. But I promise you, the waiting is almost over. He left the room. Rosa sat alone in the silence, holding her music against her chest. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the world was about to hear her song. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Rosa's life. Daniel had kept his promise. He had gone to the department heads, played them recordings he made on his phone, shown them the handwritten pages. Most of them had been skeptical. A few had laughed. But Daniel would not give up. He called in favors. He begged. He made himself a nuisance until finally someone agreed to listen. The conservatory decided to give Rosa an audition slot. It was the first exception they had made in almost 20 years. But there was a catch. They would not just have Daniel play a piano reduction. They wanted to hear the full piece, performed by a string quartet, in front of a panel of faculty members, donors, and alumni. If the music was as good as Daniel claimed, they wanted to know. And if it was not, they wanted to put the matter to rest once, and for all. Rosa almost said no. The thought of sitting in a room full of strangers while they judged her life's work made her feel sick. But then she thought about her grandmother, humming folk songs in the kitchen. She thought about her father, saving coins for years to buy a broken piano. She thought about all the nights she had spent lying awake, hearing music that no one else could hear. She said yes. The audition was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Rosa arrived an hour early. She wore the same blue dress with the white flowers, freshly ironed. Her daughter had offered to buy her something new, but Rosa refused. This dress had been with her through so much. It felt right to wear it now. Daniel met her at the entrance and walked her to the recital hall. It was a beautiful room with high ceilings and wooden walls designed to carry sound. There were about 40 people already seated in the audience. Rosa scanned their faces. Some looked curious. Some looked bored. A few were whispering to each other, glancing in her direction with expressions she recognized all too well. They were here to see a spectacle. They expected to watch an old woman embarrass herself. Rosa felt her stomach tighten. Her hands were cold. She wanted to run. Daniel seemed to sense her fear. He leaned close and spoke softly. "Don't look at them," he said. "When the music starts, close your eyes. Just listen. This is your music. It belongs to you. No one can take that away." Rosa nodded. She let him guide her to a seat in the front row, off to the side. From here, she could see the small stage where 4 musicians were setting up. The string quartet. 2 violins, 1 viola, 1 cello. They were young, probably students, but Daniel had told her they were the best in the program. They had been rehearsing her piece for days. A tall woman with silver hair walked to the front of the room. She was the head of the composition department, and she had the kind of face that never smiled. She welcomed everyone, explained that they were about to hear an original composition from an unaffiliated artist, and asked for respectful attention. Her tone made it clear she expected this to be a waste of time. Then she sat down, and the room went quiet. The quartet lifted their instruments. Rosa gripped the arms of her chair. This was it. 41 years had led to this moment. Every sleepless night, every melody hummed in the darkness, every tear she had cried alone in her apartment. It all came down to what happened in the next few minutes. The first violin began to play. The opening notes were soft, just as Rosa had always heard them in her head. The lullaby, the melody her grandmother used to sing, transformed into something new. The second violin joined in, adding a gentle harmony. Then the viola, weaving underneath. And finally the cello, deep and warm, grounding everything in its rich, dark tone. Rosa closed her eyes. Just as Daniel had told her to, the music washed over her. It was strange, hearing her own composition played by real instruments, in a real room, with real people listening. For so long, this music had existed only inside her. It had been her secret, her companion, her escape. And now it was free. It was out in the world, filling the air, reaching ears that had never heard it before. The piece moved through its first section. Rosa knew every note, every pause, every shift in tempo. She could feel the audience around her, their presence like a weight in the room. But she did not open her eyes. She did not want to see their faces. She only wanted to hear. The music grew more complex. The counter-melodies emerged, weaving around each other like dancers. The rhythm shifted, became more urgent. The shadow underneath the sweetness began to rise. Rosa felt her chest tighten. This was the part she had written after her husband died. The part that held all her grief, all her anger, all her fear of facing the world alone. The quartet played it perfectly. The first violinist leaned into the notes, her whole body moving with the music. The cellist closed his eyes, his bow drawing long, aching tones from the strings. Rosa could feel the emotion pouring out of them. They understood. They felt it. And then she heard something unexpected. A small sound from somewhere in the audience. A sniffle. Someone was crying. Rosa opened her eyes. She turned her head slightly, looking back at the rows of seats. A woman in the third row was wiping her eyes with a tissue. A man near the back had his hand pressed over his mouth. The silver-haired department head was sitting very still, her expression no longer bored or dismissive. She looked stunned. Rosa turned back to the stage. The music was moving into its final section now. The storm was passing. The darkness was lifting. The new theme emerged, the one Rosa had written when she held her first grandchild. Hope, fragile, tentative, but real. The melody climbed higher, reaching toward something just out of grasp. The strings sang together, their voices blending into one, and then the climax. All the themes came together, the lullaby and the grief and the hope, intertwining like threads in a tapestry. The music swelled until it filled every corner of the room. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not look away. She watched the quartet play the final passage, their bows moving in perfect unison, their faces shining with something that looked like joy. The last note hung in the air, a single sustained tone, soft and clear, fading slowly into silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then the first violinist lowered her bow. She looked at Rosa. There were tears on her cheeks. And then someone started to clap. It was Daniel. He was on his feet, his hands coming together loud and fast. Then another person stood, and another. Within seconds, the whole room was standing, applauding, the sound rising like a wave. Rosa stayed in her seat. She could not move. She could not breathe. She looked around at all these people who had come expecting nothing, who had whispered and smirked, and assumed she had nothing to offer. And now they were standing for her. They were clapping for her. Some of them were crying. The silver-haired woman walked over to Rosa. Her face had changed completely. The coldness was gone, replaced by something Rosa had not expected to see. Respect. "How long did you say you've been working on this piece?" she asked. Rosa's voice came out as a whisper. 41 years. The woman shook her head slowly. 41 years, she repeated. And we almost turned you away at the door. She extended her hand. Rosa took it. "I owe you an apology," the woman said. "And I think this institution owes you much more than that." The applause continued around them. Daniel appeared at Rosa's side, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split open. He put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed. "I told you," he said. "I told you the waiting was almost over." Rosa looked up at him, then out at the crowd, then at the quartet still standing on stage, their instruments resting at their sides, their faces full of wonder. 41 years of silence. And now, finally, the whole world could hear her song. But Rosa did not know that the best part was still to come. The weeks after the audition passed in a blur. Rosa could barely keep track of everything that was happening. Phone calls came from people she had never met. Emails arrived that her daughter had to help her read. The conservatory offered her something they had never offered anyone before, a special residency. They wanted her to teach, to compose, to mentor young musicians. They wanted to give her an office with a window and a piano of her own. Rosa said yes. She did not even have to think about it, but that was not the best part. 3 months after the audition, Rosa received a letter. It came in a thick cream envelope with gold writing on the front. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an invitation. The Boston Philharmonic Orchestra wanted to perform Lala's Chiaspera at their spring concert. A full orchestra, 70 musicians, a sold-out concert hall. Her music. Rosa read the letter 3 times before she believed it was real. The night of the concert arrived faster than Rosa expected. She spent the whole day in a daze. Her daughters came over to help her get ready. They brought a new dress, a deep burgundy color that reminded Rosa of the wine her father used to drink on special occasions. They did her hair and helped her with her shoes, and told her over and over again how proud they were. Rosa looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. For so long, she had seen only a cleaning lady, a widow, a grandmother. But tonight, she saw something else. She saw the girl who used to stand outside the music school in Santiago, memorizing melodies through the window. She saw the young woman who had once been told her music would outlive them all. Maybe it finally would. The concert hall was the most beautiful place Rosa had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Red velvet seats stretched back row after row until they disappeared into shadow. The stage was enormous, filled with music stands and chairs and instruments waiting to be played. Rosa stood in the wings, watching the audience file in. There were hundreds of them, maybe 1,000. All these people here to listen to music. Her music. Daniel found her backstage. He was wearing a suit, the first time Rosa had ever seen him dressed up. He looked nervous, which made Rosa smile. She was the one about to have her life's work performed in front of 1,000 strangers, but he was the one sweating. "How do you feel?" he asked. Rosa thought about the question. How did she feel? Scared, excited, grateful, sad, happy. All of it at once, swirling together like the themes in her composition. "I feel ready," she said. Daniel smiled. "Good, because there are some people here who want to see you before the show." He led her down a hallway to a small room with a couch and a mirror. Rosa opened the door and stopped. Her whole family was there. Both her daughters, her son-in-law, and her 3 grandchildren dressed in their best clothes. Looking up at her with wide eyes, the youngest one, the little girl who had asked about the humming, ran forward and wrapped her arms around Rosa's legs. "Abuela, we came to hear your song." Rosa knelt down and pulled her close. She looked at her other grandchildren, at her daughters, at this family she had built from nothing in a country that was not her own. She thought about all the years she had worked to keep them fed, to keep a roof over their heads, to give them chances she never had. She had always told herself that was enough, that her own dreams did not matter as long as they were okay. But now she understood something she had not understood before. Her dreams mattered too, not instead of her family, but alongside them. She could be a grandmother and a composer. She could be a cleaning lady and an artist. She could be all the things she had ever been, all at once, without having to choose. "I am so glad you are here," she whispered. Her oldest daughter knelt beside her. "Mama, we have something for you." She held out a small box. Rosa opened it. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny pendant shaped like a piano. "We found a picture of your old piano," her daughter said. "The one in Santiago. We had this made to match it." Rosa could not speak. She held the little pendant in her palm and stared at it through blurry eyes. The piano, the one her father had saved for years to buy, the one she had left behind on the worst night of her life. And now here it was, transformed into something she could carry with her always. Her daughters helped her put on the necklace. It rested against her chest, right over her heart. A stagehand knocked on the door. 5 minutes until the concert began. Rosa hugged each of her grandchildren, kissed her daughters, and walked back to the wings of the stage. The lights in the concert hall dimmed. The audience fell silent. The conductor walked out to applause and took his place at the podium. Rosa watched from the shadows as 70 musicians raised their instruments. And then the music began. The opening notes floated out into the hall, soft and sweet. The lullaby. Rosa closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. It was different hearing it played by a full orchestra. Bigger, fuller. The strings created a warmth that filled every corner of the room. The woodwinds added color she had only imagined. The brass gave weight to the shadows underneath. The piece moved through its sections, just as Rosa had written them. The gentle beginning, the rising tension, the storm of grief that crashed and broke, and slowly, painfully, gave way to something new. The audience sat in perfect stillness, barely breathing. Caught in the current of the music. Rosa opened her eyes and looked out at the stage. The musicians were completely absorbed. The first violinist swayed with each phrase. The cellist had tears on his cheeks. The conductor moved his hands like he was shaping the air itself, guiding the music through its peaks and valleys. And then the final section. The hope, the light that waits. The melody climbed higher and higher, reaching toward something just beyond the edge of sight. The themes wove together one last time, the lullaby and the grief and the hope, all of it combining into a single soaring wave of sound. Rosa felt it building in her chest, pressing against her ribs, demanding to be released. The final note rang out, clear and pure, hanging in the air like a prayer. Silence. And then the audience exploded. The applause was like thunder. People leaped to their feet. Some were crying. Some were cheering. The sound rolled toward the stage in waves, washing over the musicians, over the conductor, over Rosa, standing alone in the wings. Someone pushed her gently from behind. It was Daniel. "Go," he said. "They want to see you." Rosa walked out onto the stage. Her legs felt weak. The lights were blinding. But she kept walking until she reached the conductor, who took her hand and raised it high. The applause grew even louder. Rosa looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd, her family was watching. Her daughters. Her grandchildren. The little girl who had asked about the humming. She thought about her grandmother singing in the kitchen. She thought about her father, carrying a broken piano through the door. She thought about the young woman she had been, full of dreams that seemed impossible. And she thought about all the years she had spent in silence, believing that part of her life was over. But it was not over. It had never been over. The music had always been there, waiting inside her, patient and eternal. The light that waits. Rosa smiled through her tears and took a bow. 41 years of silence. And now, finally, the whole world knew her name.